so that we actually get the replay of it, because you're going to want that later. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I know that we still have people joining in, but welcome everybody. My name is Melissa, and I'm the owner of Melissa Forziat Events and Marketing. And today we're going to talk about marketing your farmers market and building your community. So the first few minutes here, just bear with me. I want to set up what we'll be doing on this webinar and how I'm going to be approaching this material. But before I do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from and kind of how I'm looking at this information to present it to you. I started out in my career doing major international sport events. So I worked Olympic Winter Games and Rugby World Cup and the US Olympic Committee. So I worked with some of the biggest brands and some of the biggest events in the world. And then about 6 years ago, I started my own business, my own micro business, working with nonprofits and small businesses. So what I was trying to do was I was trying to take the principles of how a huge event and a huge brand like an Olympic Games has to market itself. They have to just go with a wide range of partnerships. They have to reach a lot of people. They have to sell a lot of tickets. They have to get a lot of involvement, and their message needs to be widespread. So there are certain things that they have to do in order to make that happen, but they also have the budget to do it and the human resources to do it. So when I started working with small businesses and nonprofits, I realized that there were a lot of principles that those big brands are using that very much carry over, but how do you do those things when you have a smaller budget, when you have fewer people to help share your message? And these are questions that I have to answer with every client that I work with, and even in my own business. So we're going to apply all of this today to farmers markets, and I'm really going to be looking at this from the standpoint of how do you build strong relationships, strong partnerships through your marketing that can help you with every single message that you send. About a week ago, maybe a little bit more, I sent out an email to those who had already registered to ask what they wanted to learn on this webinar. And what I found was, well, first of all, you can already hear, I'm sure, from the locations that you're all from, there's a really wide range of size of market, location in the country. There's a pretty big range. Some of you are daily markets all throughout the year. Some of you are once a week, some of you are seasonal. So there's a few different ways to look at this, but my goal in this presentation is to give every single person something to think about. There's a lot of really densely packed information. We're gonna have a build into it, but hopefully when you watch it through and when you watch back the replay, you're gonna get more and more ideas that may be relevant to your market. So hopefully that sets us up a little bit there. Few items for housekeeping here before we move on. This is a great time to silence your phone, to shut off any messaging devices. I should point out that I have all of you on mute, so it will only distract you if those things are happening, but I do want you to get the most out of this and to be able to be completely focused on the material. In terms of slides and also the replay, I will send that out after this presentation is done. I hope that you're actually going to look back at it, even if you were on live, to review the information and see how you can apply it back to your own farmers market. In terms of questions, I encourage you to send in questions as we go. They will be addressed at the end unless there's something that becomes really urgent as we go along. I wanted to introduce you virtually. I have somebody from my team. Her name is Alyssa. I know Alyssa and Melissa, we get that a lot. Alyssa is in the chat, and she is going to be watching for all of your comments and your questions. You won't be able to see each other, but she is going to be on the lookout for everything that you send in. At the end of the webinar, she's going to be pulling questions that seem to have a global enough answer for us to approach all of that with our responses as we go along. So those are a few things for you to be aware of. Again, feel free to send those questions in as we go, and Alyssa will be on the lookout for them. So here is how I'm going to approach this material today. When I asked you all what you wanted to know about marketing, some of you were very specific about wanting to know about certain platforms, but most of you were more interested in the categories of people that you're trying to reach. So the way that I'll be approaching it today is starting by setting the stage and talking about partnership marketing. And then we're going to look at 3 different categories of types of constituents that you want to bring in: sponsors, vendors, and customers. Vendors and customers were certainly 2 really major pain points that were brought up, but a lot of people talked about wanting to have new revenue sources and new funding streams. And to me, the sponsorship question is actually one that links in with everything else. So this is how I'll approach the material today, and we're going to get tactical in each of those areas, but I want to make sure it's framed from the standpoint of how to reach those particular constituent groups. So this webinar is for you if, first of all, if you're a manager or an operator of a farmer's market. I think that would make sense, right? That's who this is meant to apply to. Also, it's for you if you're looking for low-cost ways to market your farmer's market. I like to get creative. I take sort of a guerrilla marketing approach to a lot of the marketing that I do. And I appreciate that some people do have the budget to spend, and then you're welcome to spend it and do all of these things better and faster. But if you don't have a huge budget to spend, there's still a lot that you can do creatively to get your brand and your market out there. And also, this webinar is for you if you want to find ways to engage your community and get them to be more active and more satisfied with your market. So that could be because they are already engaged, but you want to do better in that area and get more involvement. It could be that you're already sensing disengagement or you know that it's there and you're trying to get people back. So all of these things are things that we'll do today, and we'll talk about that in marketing your farmer's market and building your community. So hopefully that sets the stage. And now let's get into the content. I wanted to begin by talking about making the most of partnership marketing. That, like I said, is the framework that I'm looking at all of this through. And what I love about partnership marketing is it's the one type of marketing that I believe I can comfortably recommend to any type of business endeavor out there, because the chances that you can find an ally are really strong. It doesn't limit you from other types of marketing, it only enhances it. So I want to make sure we understand that starting point, and then we'll talk tactically about each of the constituent groups that you want to reach. Here's the big picture that we want to look at for farmers markets. There are basically 2 ways for you to market. One way is to look at all of the marketing that you yourself are doing to directly reach the populations that you need to reach. That's something that you're going to be doing all along the way, and that's probably what you've been focusing on. The other way to look at this is, how do you empower others to market your farmer's market? It is ultimately everybody's responsibility to get the message out there for their own business. If everybody is doing that collectively, you're going to get a lot more reach as an entire market. So there are really 2 ways that I look at this. There's what you're specifically putting out there, and then there's how you're empowering everybody else to share it. When I think about that in relationship to the 3 constituent groups we're going to talk about on this webinar: sponsors, customers, and vendors, you can actually be empowering each of them to support the others and to be making a better market opportunity and a better market experience for the others. Sponsors can enhance the experience of both customers and vendors. The more vendors you have, the more your customers have to do there, and the more you can attract great sponsors. The more customers you have, the more likely your vendors are to be interested in your market, and the more likely sponsors are to be interested in your market. All of these 3 things are linked, and you can use them as bait for each other and also to help share the message with each other. So ultimately, what I really want you to understand about how I'm approaching this is that you can market to all of these groups, but you can also market through them to the other ones. So when you think about how that works, I'm going to give you a lot of examples as we go along, but the principle of that is an important place to start. So partnership marketing is basically a tool that you can use. It's a framework for all of the marketing that you do for your market. It's how you enhance every single thing that you're putting out there. The definition that I want us to work with here is it's basically collaborating with other businesses or influencers for a mutual benefit. You don't have to be getting the same benefits, the exact same benefits, each of you between each other. You just have to both be benefiting in a way that's meaningful to you for your business endeavors and your business goals. So when you think about how that could look, the big picture here, even if we take sponsors, customers, vendors, if we take all those three specific things out, there are different types of partners that you could potentially build relationships with. The first one would be compatible businesses or influencers. And compatibility is a bit of a general word to use, but I mean compatibility in terms of offerings or in terms of target markets. So compatibility in your case, you could be reaching other business associations, other market type places, malls, places that have a bunch of businesses together. For example, if you're trying to reach vendors, or if they just have a common target market, it could be that you're looking at other groups that are trying to reach families, or other businesses that are trying to reach the specific subset of people that you want to be customers. So compatibility can be measured in that way. Target market is usually a good way to measure that. Different business structures is also something that I want you to look at with aligned target markets. That is, if you have a market, but there may be, let's say, for example, nonprofits or community institutions out there that are also reaching an audience that you want to reach. It's a different type of business, but it's very much possible to partner with them. Hyper-local is another interesting one. It may seem like you're already functioning in a hyper-local way because you have this market. But if you think just outside of that footprint, right? If you go, a few blocks over, if you go just over to the other side of town, how much do people know about your market there? How much are they able to recommend your market as a place to go? If they're already doing that, is there a way that they can sell the experience better? Is there a way that they can, maybe you're in a bigger city and you have a lot of things going on. Maybe your farmer's market is really large and very complicated with a lot of vendors. So maybe what your hyper-local partners can do is help people demystify your market, basically explain to them how they can get the best experience there. So in the case of a smaller market, maybe you just need to get people to tell, potential customers that your market is an option for them that day. But in the case of a bigger market, it might be about demystifying it and letting people know how to get the best experience there. Competitors are also something that I want you to think about. A number of you referenced competitors when you were asking me questions. And competitors looked very different depending on the market that was asking the question. So it could be that you've got markets on all different days of the week and you're not sure if you have enough bandwidth or enough attention from your audience for everybody to get a consistent attendance at your own market. Well, in that case, this could very much be about creating alliances with 1 or 2 nights of the week and trying to get people to get excited and to help share each other's message. Another way to look at this, a number of you talked about the fact that there's a lot of things happening in your community on a given night, on a specific time when you're doing your market. This, again, is a way you could potentially ally with some of your competitors. If you look at the ones that are immediately in your area, to be able to say, if you come over to this side of town, customers, you're able to do these things all in a row and you can have a full day of it, or a full afternoon of it. So these are ways that you can potentially link up with partners to try to create mini alliances and draw attention to your market. Instead of having what feels like competition, you can be enhancing each other's message. Obviously, anytime you talk about competitors, you have to bear in mind the nature of the competitor involved. Sometimes we just don't want to be in business with them. Sometimes we just don't want to be working with them at all. This isn't really about creating legal agreements. It's just about creating alliances. So anytime you feel like there's potentially a strong enough relationship to ally and boost each other's voice, that's what we're talking about here. So generically speaking, how do you build a strong partnership? We're going to talk about this in more detail for each of the 3 groups that I talked about. That's going to be the rest of the presentation, but just a really quick, how do you build those strong partnerships? First of all, you look back at that last list. You look back at, the types of people you think could be partners, and you identify which ones in your community could be just like that. Also, when you've identified businesses that you think that you could become an ally with, how do you propose your common business interests? What is it you both want to get out of this relationship? What is your ultimate goal? Is that something that you can both help with? And then lastly, how can you actually support each other to get there? Is there a tool that you have in place to be able to help your partner achieve that message and vice versa? If so, you have a potentially strong partnership that could stand the test of time. So these are a few things that you just generically want to think of. And how do you use this? Let's circle it back. This gives you an opportunity to empower your business community and also empower your customers through all the marketing that you do for your market. Now, let's get specific, because I'm sure that you want to start thinking about this in relationship to the different constituent groups you want to reach. So leveraging sponsors is the first one that I wanted to address. Nobody actually dropped the word sponsors in their questions to me, but a lot of people talked about funding sources. A lot of people talked about wanting to attract vendors and customers. And to me, this is a really important piece of the puzzle. So when it comes to traditional sponsorships, this is all about attracting companies or organizations that want to reach your audience. So they have identified a certain subset of your target markets that they also are trying to reach, and your ability to get in front of those people is what is going to attract them to support you. Who could these people be? Who could these companies be? The biggest one that I'm sure we all would think of first is corporations. In some cases, if you have a smaller market, this may be very aspirational for you, but maybe not, because it's possible that the target market of people that you're reaching is perfectly suited to what one of those corporations is trying to do. And when I say corporations, I mean bigger companies, not necessarily small businesses, though they could be small businesses. So when you look at this is probably going to be a cash sponsorship, but it could very well be a value in kind sponsorship where they're donating something that you would have had to buy in order to function. It could also be that they're donating, let's say, prizes or something that you can use to incentivize your other markets. Now, another category to look at here could be, for example, service businesses, because your market probably, and when it comes to vendors, it probably caters more to product businesses, maybe food businesses, some of these businesses that have something to show. Service businesses might have a harder time getting in front of your audience in a way that's really meaningful. So how can they become part of the process? In what way can they contribute? So could this potentially be through a cash sponsorship, or could there be prizes or some other relationship that they can have with you that can get them in front of your audience? Two that I want to link up here are nonprofits and community institutions, because they very well might be trying to reach the types of people who would be customers at your market. They might not be doing cash sponsorships, but maybe they would. More likely, they might do a cross-marketing sponsorship, and you can assign some sort of a value to that that would give them tangible benefits. But the idea here is that they are helping to get your market to their audience and vice versa. And that's something that will mean something for you over time. And the last one I wanted to point out here as a category is media, because with the media, while it may not be a cash sponsorship, they have access to potentially doing a spot for you on a show, to doing an article for you, to getting your photos out there in a way that feels reputation building. So again, they also might not be perfectly fitting into the cash sponsorship category, but there's value to what they do if you can assign that value. Now, there's a question here that came in, a really good question about sponsorships coming with strings, which is true. So how can those be minimized or otherwise structured so as not to compromise the integrity of a nonprofit, vendor market, cooperative market? Really, really good question. I'm going to get into benefits in just a moment, but I want to say sponsorship is, benefits are a reasonable thing for a sponsor to ask for. You have to plan that out a little bit in advance. So I'm going to tell you in a few slides about how you would approach a sponsor, but you would create a sponsorship deck that has some set levels of how you can reach them in a way that is actually going to help move the needle for them without breaking your business model. Usually I find that the conversation becomes tailored once you send out a generalized deck. So you're probably going to want to talk to them specifically, but you always want to take the lead on what benefits you're going to be able to provide for them that are going to fit within the structure of what you're doing. You don't want to be creating programming or creating new experiences because you were chasing funding. But it is reasonable to believe that benefits are something that can be proposed and will be bought from those sponsors. This is something that will take time to activate, but there's a potential for you to get a lot of revenue through this process. So you have to weigh that out, and you have to price that opportunity appropriately. So I'm going to tell you more about the sponsorship deck and that whole process in just a little bit. That was a really good question, and hopefully that helps keep everybody on the same page. Now, let's look first at what you can get from sponsors, and then we'll look at the benefits piece. So how can you benefit? Well, first of all, you can frame sponsorships from a standpoint of earmarking them for certain aspects of your operation. It could be that you're able to carve out certain pieces of your market and say, this is the thing that you're sponsoring, and create all the benefit around that. For example, let's say you wanted to attract more vendors to your market, and you thought it would be interesting to create sort of a program within your market where you have a booth that vendors can use as an incubator that a sponsor is paying for. So it could be a sponsor booth, but a new vendor is in it each week to get them exposed to your market. That's actually something that you can carve out for a sponsor, and you can make it really clear how they're benefiting the community by doing that. It's just one example, but it's a way to look at earmarking. Now, another thing to look at is by separating out timeframes for your audience. So for sponsors, it could be that you've got a market that runs every single day all year long. Maybe you divide it up by months. Maybe you have a seasonal market that runs once a week. Maybe you pick a day, each week you're giving that to a sponsor, and you can create an entire package of benefits around that you basically use as a turnkey solution for each new sponsor time period. Another thing that you can do with sponsors is you can use them to solicit prizes or incentives that can be marketed directly to vendors or customers to keep them interested. So it's not necessarily adding programming, it's adding some sort of an opportunity for you to get in front of your audience in a stronger way. Cross-marketing is another one. And if you look back at that slide that we just saw, there are certainly examples of media and community institutions. They might not be coming at you with a cash sponsorship, but the cross-marketing benefit is massive because they have a whole different audience that they might be reaching. And even if there's crossover, they're going to help enhance your message. They're going to build your reputation and show why people need to care about you in a way that you could never do yourself, because it means so much more coming from somebody else. And then the last piece there, every time you're reaching a new sponsor company or a sponsor business, you're potentially finding ways to leverage their employees and to get directly in front of their employees. So how can you get in front of their employee base in a way that's strong, meaningful, and planned? Now, this dovetails back to the question that was just asked. What kind of benefits are sponsors looking for? So sponsors could be looking for, of course, event exposure. That seems like an obvious one, and it's something where you can carve out all different opportunities within the event that make sense for you, whether that be places they can put signage, or ways that they can be involved or welcome the audience, places that they can put their own collateral. These are all things that you can be looking at. Now, the next bullet point is an interesting one because program benefits are something that sometimes sponsors are not even allowed to sponsor events. In some cases, sponsors say, I can't sponsor an event, but I can sponsor a program. Do you have something within the context of your market that is a program? If so, this is a great thing for you to be able to tell them about. For example, that example I gave you earlier of having sort of an incubator vendor booth, that would be a program within the bigger picture of your farmers market, and that's something that could potentially get across the line when the event itself can't. Brand visibility certainly is one that a lot of sponsors look for. I have had a few times where I've worked with organizations to do sponsor outreach, and the sponsors that they wanted to attract didn't want brand visibility, which creates a really interesting conversation about, well, what do you want? A lot of times they were looking for ways to engage their employees instead. But brand visibility, when I say that, I mean, how is their brand visible through the event itself to the people who are in attendance? And that's all about logo presence, having opportunities to speak to the crowd. How can they get in front of the people who are actually there? Online exposure is a similar concept, but it's reaching the audience of people who are following them online, but may or may not actually be at your market. So when it comes to online exposure, that could be through having a logo on your website or a shout out on social media or in a newsletter. These are all things that sponsors could potentially be looking for. And when I'm creating sponsorship materials, I think about how can I pull from each of these buckets so I can keep the conversation going no matter who the sponsor is. So the steps of acquiring sponsors, you would create a sponsorship deck. It's the very first thing that most sponsors ask for. A sponsorship deck is really simply a brochure, and it's a type of thing that explains your market, who you're reaching, the demographics, and maybe the quantity of people that you're reaching or how engaged they are. It could be explaining who your team is, the history of your market, a little bit more about your market's mission. So it's giving sponsors a full picture of what your market actually is. And then within that document, it's explaining to them, for this amount of money, I can give you these things. And that's something that you can think through in advance. I would usually use something like this as a starting point for discussion. And usually they want to tailor it a little bit from there, but you have to know what is going to be manageable and viable on your side. When I say creating a sponsorship deck, I want you to realize that this is the type of thing that they're going to be asking from every group that approaches them for a sponsorship. So remember that you are competing against everybody who's reached out to that sponsor for funding, and you want to make sure that you're presenting your information in a way that is as competitive as possible, that represents you well, and that's going to make it easy for them to get all the information in one stop. Once you've got that, the next thing I would do is make a list of all those companies that you think might be trying to reach your audience and the contacts at them. In your case, that might be somebody in community relations. And from there, I'd begin outreach, knowing that it might be a long road to building that relationship. So how can you get them to your market? How can you get them sitting down with you for coffee? How can you get them to just become familiar with what's really happening in your community in a way that will keep them engaged with you? Some will be open to dropping money right away. Some it might take a little bit longer, but those relationships are usually more solid. So these are some steps that I would look like. I've done this with a lot of organizations before, and this is a process that I find works really well. It just takes more time to activate certain sponsors. So hopefully you're already getting a picture of how sponsorship can enhance the experience of vendors and customers, but we're going to get into that more in each subsequent section. So now we're going to take a look at the vendors. This was an area that a lot of you talked about as being a hot button issue for you, wanting more vendors and keeping them happy. So I want to look at it this way. Your vendors are also your brand ambassadors. They are part of making their own market strong. They have the power to make their own community more marketable. And if they're feeling disengaged now, they might be telling you that it's on you to create all of the strength of your market. And I encourage you to actually create a framework that uses them to build their own market, because only through everybody working together will your market community really be attractive. So this is a way, very loosely, that I would look at, how this process could work for you. Think about it this way. So if a customer believes in the overall reputation of your market, then they're more likely to attend the market, look around, and buy from one of the businesses, right? Now, when they've done that, the customer now has an experience with the business and they can vouch for the business. But in doing that, the business has now had a great experience with your market and with this customer. So they believe that there's value to having been in your market to begin with. And now the market has an opportunity to vouch back for the business because there's a good relationship there. this is what I like to think of as a web. It's a cycle, and this is the cycle that you want to get into where everybody is feeding into it and everybody has a part. So in terms of raising the overall profile of your market, you really want to be able to encourage your vendors to show their participation. At the very least, this is something that they can be doing, but you want to make it easy for them to do this. So this could be that you're creating social media posts or events for every single, day of your market, if that's something that's viable, and you're giving them something to share. It could be that you've got printed materials or postcards or invitations that they can use to distribute to their audience to show that they're part of your market and that they're also, wanting to invite new people to it. It could be that you have online content that you're regularly putting out about what's happening at your market, and it's something they can share. It might also be that you encourage them to put their own content out that shows their experience at the market, and that you have a forum for sharing that, which basically helps them to get more eyes on their own business. It could be that you've created a vendor directory so that people see which businesses are affiliated with you. And it could be that your vendors are actually listing their participation in places where people might find them. So that could be on a website, it could be on social media, it could be in newsletters that they send out. These are all ways that your vendors can show their participation. You want to give them a voice, you want to give them a role, and ultimately, one of the ways that you can do this more easily is to think of all these opportunities that you have at your market as mini launches. How many different types of campaigns can you create from your market? Even if it's a daily market every day of the year, how can you divide it up by theme or by sponsors or by different entertainment that you're running? Is there anything that you're doing that makes specific days at your market unique that you can turn into a campaign that gives your vendors a reason to promote it? How can you incentivize your vendors to do all this? So I've got sort of 5 different things here. I pulled out attracting customers. We're going to talk about that next. And obviously having a good customer base is something that's going to be attractive to your vendors because the potential for sales is there. But there are other things that you can do as well. There's special features. Is there any way that you can highlight specific vendors who are among the list of vendors who work with you, where you can really help boost their profile, raise their awareness within your community? This is either you creating your own content or sharing theirs. It could be that you have a prize pool, maybe sponsor prizes or incentives that are, you can use to reward them for certain types of behavior, whether that be attending the market or by doing a lot of promotion for it. Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is that your vendors should be trying to get the most marketing they can for their own business, right? And to do that, they have to realize that there's a potential really strong network for them among the other businesses that are vendors, right? These are all businesses that are trying to reach a similar audience and who are in the same area, and they certainly have a lot in common. This is an opportunity for networking for them and partnerships between them. How can you foster that? What can you do to create stronger relationships between them? It'll create a stronger community for you, but it's also just really smart marketing for them. And if they have relationships with other vendors, that's something that can potentially keep them coming back to you and keep them loyal. So it's adding another layer of value to your market. And then, of course, the last piece here is to build the reputation of your overall market. And this involves every group that you're reaching out to, sponsors, vendors, customers, community organizations, all sharing the positive news of your market. All of that goes into making it seem like your market is a place that is worthwhile to be and builds that reputation so more people want to be there. So all of these, I would say, the big picture, the multidimensional picture here is that these are all ways to keep your vendors happy. What I want you to remember here is that everybody is part of this process in building the reputation and the value of your market. If your vendors are telling you that it's on you to do all of this, then they're really not taking the ownership on the fact that they need to be taking initiative in their own business to market and create relationships. We're always better together than we are separately. So what you can do with this is you can create a framework where you empower your vendors to market you, and you can make that commonplace. You can just give them the tools to share it, and then the ones who are really keen will. The ones who aren't need to understand that that's part of their business. That's part of marketing their own business. You're probably going to have to educate them on the way to do that for your market. You'll have to create the materials and show them what to do with them, but they are part of the process because they're a part of your community and they're part of what makes your community worthwhile. So when it comes to attracting customers, this is the last one that I wanted to touch on, and it's certainly a big one. It's one that many of you referenced. So when we talk about attracting customers, I'm going to talk tactically in just a moment, but the big picture here is that there's power in joining forces in marketing together. There's power in joining forces with your sponsors, there's power in joining forces with your vendors, and everybody working together to reach these customers. Here's a visual that I think helps show how I want this to look, right? So this is your community. You know, this graphic represents your community. So if all the marketing that you're doing is, you know, your voice and your voice alone, you're going to reach the group of people that you're already reaching. And maybe that'll grow a little bit, you know, here and there, and there'll be different marketing that you do to grow that audience. But this basically represents the audience that you are reaching by yourself. But here's what can happen if your voices are working together. Your community, plus your sponsors' community, plus every single vendor's community. This is now the audience that you reach. So if you can create new campaigns and new feeling campaigns out of all these different things that are happening at your market, and all of you are sharing and pushing that message out to each of these audiences, you're going to reach more people this way. And you'll be enhancing and reinforcing each other's message in the process. So let's talk about some of the promotional tools that you have to attract customers. This is not a comprehensive list, but I did want to get you thinking. These are different options in terms of sort of theming your experience, as well as actual tools that you can use. When it comes to attracting visitors, can you have themes around specific, you know, periods of time that you can promote? Do you have sponsored giveaways that you can use to incentivize your audience to attend? Is there an experience that you can create that would be something that you can market? Can you make the overall experience of your market something that has like a game within it? So for example, sometimes you'll see something like a passport where if you take a certain number of actions or you visit a certain number of vendors and you sort of get validation for that, there's a potential reward in it for you. Is there like a scavenger hunt or something that you can create? And when paired with a sponsored giveaway, it gives people an activity to do within your market. When it comes to social media, there are a couple things about this that I wanted to mention, but you know, do you have an option to create more social media traffic around each event where people can do more invitation, where people can do more tagging and really get people, your partners activated in this process? Also with, you know, combined with that, do you have newsletters that you send out? And if you don't, is there a way for you to start building an email list of the people who are attending? Is there a way for you to incentivize collecting emails so that you can inform people about the new things that are happening at your market with each of these new campaigns you run? And of course, your website is always a place to put this information about what's happening in your market. Another thing to consider here is nonprofit awareness days. I put nonprofits in that sponsorship category. I consider them a slightly different bucket from the average sponsor. They're probably not going to be paying you cash, but they have an entire audience of their own that they are very motivated to reach. So, you know, how can you leverage that within your market? Another thing to consider here is, you know, whenever you have different campaigns or whenever you want your vendors to be able to invite people or your sponsors to be able to invite people, what collateral are you giving them to do that? Whether that be online or whether it be invitations or postcards that are helping to promote the event. One other thing I wanted to mention is the opportunity to create a social media conversation around your market. So when you look at, like, for example, custom hashtags, Is there a hashtag you can create that only people at the market that day, or the people who are at the market at all, are using to share their own experiences? This is a great thing because it actually gives you access to content that they're creating, and you have all the options you need to after that to figure out what you want to do with them. So that's the kind of thing that you can share, you can retweet, you can also use it in other materials that you're creating. It's an opportunity for you to potentially tag people, and this is the type of stuff that they're going to be really excited that you shared. And then lastly, influencers can be a way to attract visitors. And influencers do not have to be world famous celebrities. Influencers can be people who are important in your community in some way. And those people being at your event are going to help attract an audience of their own. All of these things are things that you can think about as a means of attracting new people. Now, there was one other question that I thought was a really good one. Some of you were more concerned about how to keep your customers there. Maybe you felt like you had a pretty good audience to begin with, but they're dropping away at a certain point, and you're noticing that maybe the market is starting to have a lapse of attendance after a certain time. So the question for that is, how do you incentivize them to stay? Here are a few ideas. There's crossover in some of these, but I just want to get you thinking about what some of your options are in this area. So, can you involve local artists and have art displays so you can have something else that's happening at the same time? Can you potentially have special performances that happen at a certain time when people would have been more likely to be leaving? Can you have something that is a sponsored incentive, maybe a giveaway of some sort, or some sort of prize that happens at the very time people would be likely to be walking, back to their cars? In terms of like the game within the market, do you have, like I said, a passport program where people have to take a certain number of actions to be eligible for some sort of a reward that encourages them to stay on site longer? Same with any games or activities that you launch at a certain point when you would have seen participation lagging. Interactive social media. This is a way for you to really start tracking how long people are staying with you and how long they're being active in conversation with you. Anything that you can do as a pop-up attractor. That could be having a special food truck that comes in, or at a time that doesn't compete with your other vendors, at a time when you really want people to stay there. And there's one other idea that I wanted to present to you that I think is kind of an interesting one, and that's having vendor referrals. So vendors actually being sort of assigned to refer other people, creating partnerships between themselves where they can say, oh, you know what, if you like this place, you're probably really gonna like this other vendor all the way across the market. It's the same philosophy as like if you go to a grocery store and you see that the milk is all the way in the back. You have to walk all the way across the store to get there. Well, if every vendor is mentioning another vendor and encouraging the customers to go to another vendor, they're basically keeping people on site longer, or they're giving them a reason to stay on site longer. So it's something to think about. Can you create something like that in an intentional way, or just encourage your vendors to do it, and hope that that has the positive response of, the power of suggestion really does lead customers from one place to the next. So I just want you to remember that, everybody who is in your market network is ultimately part of this solution of getting more people there, of building your reputation, and creating more strength in your community. We really are, everybody has to be playing a role if your community is going to be strong. And I'm hoping that this gave you some ideas to get you there. I know that there were some ideas that were thrown in along the way that might have gotten you thinking for your specific type of market. Hopefully there was at least one thing in there that just sparks some new thought process for you. So what we talked about today is making the most of partnership marketing. Then we talked about how to use that concept across 3 different constituent groups, which are sponsors, vendors, and also customers. And in just a moment, I'm going to take some questions from you. So I want you to start thinking about those questions and getting them into Alyssa. I'll give a moment for that. And in the meantime, I wanted to give you an opportunity because you're getting an idea of how I think about marketing. I'm very partnership based, and I really believe in getting creative. For those of you who feel like you got some ideas, but you want to flesh them out more and you want to know how to apply them specifically to your market, I wanted to offer you a 1-hour consultation specifically on your farmer's market. So that can include up to 3 participants from your market. It could be board members, it could be people who are on staff. You can send me materials in advance to look at. That could be a calendar or a vendor list or a schedule or something else that you want me to review. And then you would get a full hour of actionable feedback. Basically, taking maybe ideas like this, but really thinking through how to make it work specifically to build your market's community, knowing how many different types of groups are on this webinar. As a reminder, the questions that I answer in just a moment that Alyssa is calling from, I'm really going to try to focus on ones that have sort of global answers because there's so many different types of markets represented on this webinar. But this is a chance to get more specific information for you. So if this is interesting to you, I have a link that you can check out for the next week. I'm making this 25% off to do, basically a 1-hour consultation with me. I'm going to send you the slides after this, so you'll have access to this link and you'll be able to redeem this, and we can schedule the call after next week when everybody's available. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of that opportunity to get your specific questions answered. So let me ask you a question, as we're letting questions come in here. Is there something that you have found has been working for you that you want to tell us about? Something that you feel like has been a really interesting opportunity that's brought a lot of interest to your market? So I'm also keen to hear about that as well. Feel free to send in questions, but also let us know if there's something that you strongly recommend to other markets like yours to really make sure that they're thinking about their options and building their base. So let's see here. How do you get paid for work that you perform? I'm assuming that's an excellent question, and I'm assuming that means that we've got a lot of volunteer market managers. I am sure that is the case. This is an area that, this goes back to how your farmer's market is structured and sort of what your board, if you have a board, has agreed to in the past. This is an area where you really want to look at, if you're not getting paid, are there certain revenue streams that you can start promoting where you can begin to pitch your value or get a cut from it? Sponsorship is probably an area that you want to take a closer look at if this is the case for you, because sponsorship is something that inherently is generating revenue. Yes, bringing in more vendors probably does that as well to a degree, but sponsorship has a way of actually doing that in a much broader way that can be flashier and more impactful. So if you can ever attach compensation for you to something that you're doing to generate revenue, I would say that sponsorship marketing is probably one piece of that. I also have something that I can tell you about later. I'll check out who asked that question. I have an option for you on that as well. Another question, how do you give your market to the local community so that they can engage and take ownership for the market's success? I really think that part of this is, I'm going to take a big picture answer on that. I think that if you look at it as telling the story of your market, you can really look at how the story of your market is your community's market, is your community's story. So by highlighting who all the people are, the evolution of your market, the fact that it's been a fixture in your community for a certain amount of time, is something that you can use as a story building process. Stories are usually what people latch onto more than actual marketing. It's much easier for people to wrap their brains around how they can be a part of a story than accepting a call to action that they weren't prepared to take on. So story sharing is something that people are more likely to do. And yet we can embed sales messages within that. So how can you share the story of your market? That is what I would look at. all these different community institutions, all these different vendors, highlighting different customers who were in attendance, showing how your sponsors are involved. All of this contributes to your overall story and is something that they can be proud about, is something that they can be proud that their community is thriving in that way. So I would answer it from that standpoint. There are a lot of ways to answer that question, but the beauty of sharing the story is that every method that you're using to distribute information about your market can have that story going out. And that's the kind of thing that people will want to share for you as well, even your vendors and your sponsors. Let's see, we have another question here. How do we make our market stand out? There's several other farmers markets in the surrounding area where we are all doing the marketing and outreach recommended. So I would really continue to look at building some new partnerships in a very targeted way. Who can you sit down with for coffee and really start getting some unique community institutions and community fixtures and maybe influencers to start sharing your message for you. It's not just about the message that you're sharing for yourself. This might be the part where you need to show how strong your reputation is with the community outside as well, because it's their reputation that's going to make your reputation stronger. It's showing that other, I like to think of it that anything that we say ourselves is not going to be as strong as what other people say for us. So getting those testimonials working for you is probably the way that I would go next. And that's an intentional thing that you can do where you can create a list of target groups out there that you want to be sharing your message and see how many of those groups you can really start sitting down with, coming up with a plan, or just in general, incentivizing them to be part of your market community. So that was a really good question. I like that. And I think that really goes to the power of social proof, because to raise the perception of your market, you really want people to understand that other people that they value, that they trust, value you back. So that was an excellent one. If there are any other questions, feel free to add those in. I've got a lengthy one. Let's see here. I had somebody who contributed some things that have been working for them, and I wanted to share that with you as well. They've had library story time. I really like that one. That's, when we talk about community institutions, is that local libraries, local firehouses, local museums, any of these groups that are potentially creating their own programming. How can they be involved in yours? I like the library storytime idea. Live music, an activity tent with local nonprofits and businesses to engage shoppers. They've had school field trips. Yeah, I like it. And I'm having some people talk about the costing of attracting people. What does it cost to attend or be a vendor? That's something that you can play with strategically. And it might be that you set, for example, vendor booth prices, vendor booth admission at a certain level, but that you have scholarship opportunities or sponsorship opportunities like what we talked about. And that's a way for you to keep the value the same, but potentially be able to attract more people at that sort of lower tier. I like that. Kids days. And I think that goes into the idea of having a theme. So Kids Day is certainly a theme, but there are different types of themes that you could leverage depending on whether you are really looking at monthly themes because you've got a daily market, or whether you're looking at week by week. Another question that came in: how do you figure out who your market audience is, who your ideal target audience is, and then how to reach them? This is going to be a really layered question for farmers markets because you have a lot of different audiences that you're reaching. In fact, as a starting point, the 3 different segments that I've talked about in this presentation are target markets, right? You're targeting sponsors, you're targeting customers, you're targeting vendors. And then within that, you've got even different target markets, right? There may be certain types of vendors that you're looking for that you can classify in different ways. It could be that you're pulling from different parts of town or neighboring towns. It could be that you've got different types of businesses or services that you're wanting to display. Customers, there's going to be a large volume in there as well, because you might be reaching families, you might be reaching people who are on dates, you might be reaching, there could be so many different segments of people. So the question is how? Well, there's kind of no replacement for actually doing this work. One of the things that I would start doing is looking at the people who are already attending your farmers market and start to classify them. Get to know the people who are already there. Because if you're starting from scratch, it's much harder to imagine the types of people that you're reaching. But I think if the next time you're holding your market, to be able to look around and profile the types of people that you're seeing, it's a really good starting point that you have access to right now. And then you can start delving into that even more and starting to put more of an avatar around them. There are a lot of tools that I have for answering that question, so I'm going to take a look at who asked it and I'll provide you with some other information. So a question, how do you feel about Facebook ads? Okay, how do I feel about Facebook ads? I don't use them myself, and I don't often talk about them because I'm usually talking about how to market on a budget. I find that with Facebook ads, the spend has to be fairly high before you really start seeing a return with the conversions. Where I spend my time, and this is very much my philosophy, and I have an entire How to Win at Social Media presentation I can show you if that's something you want to know more about. I'm a big believer in, instead of spending that money on Facebook promoting, to spend time, or to pay somebody to spend time actively engaging with all of these community organizations you're trying to turn the heads of. Because all of that conversation that you're creating on other people's pages drives people back to your own page. So the answer to that question is probably a little bit different than you'll hear from other marketers, but if you check out my Facebook page, it's been working for me. This is how I've built my audience. It's how I built audiences for clients that I work with, where I manage their social media. By getting out there and creating conversations on other people's pages as your business page or as your business, you will bring people back to your own page. It's like inbound marketing for your own page. And to me, that's been far more impactful than those who just lean on ads and don't create the conversation with it. Again, very philosophical answer to that, and I'm happy to provide more information for those of you who are interested to know more about my approach to that particular question, because I believe that you can use social media really effectively without paying for ads, or sparingly paying for ads at certain times when you're trying to promote very particular campaigns. But for just creating a general audience, I think that there's a lot that you can do without them. Awesome questions. Thank you so much. This has been a really good range of questions. So I'm here for a couple more minutes if we have any others that come in. But I did want to thank you all for joining me on this. I hope that you've gotten a lot of information, or at least a few ideas that apply specifically to you, that make you start thinking about how you can use them for your own market. Again, I will be here for a couple minutes, but if you have other questions that you felt like you wanted to ask, you have my email as well if you just reply back to any of those reminders that you got directly from me. Now, I have another question that was super specific here. We have a huge and amazing representative in the region and the area, but getting more engagement and especially getting vendors is something we'd like. I'm trying to bridge the gap between in town and the market. We push for people going uptown after the market, but the merchants don't push for that to come down. This honestly is about working persistently and creatively to build those relationships and really showing people the value. And that is finding any way that you can to get in front of them and to have a meaningful conversation with them and show them the work that you've been doing on their behalf. If you start finding, not everybody is, I am a big believer in partnership marketing. A lot of people get it, some people don't. And for the businesses out there that you're trying to woo that don't get it, that's not really going to be a meaningful relationship for you long term. For those that you're trying to reach that do understand the value of joining forces, there is no end to what you can do together. So that is something that can get more and more creative as time goes on. But yeah, I would definitely say that if you know that there's a group that you need to start turning the heads of, you just kind of have to be intentional about your plan to do that. And that becomes something that you can approach the way a nonprofit might approach a major donor. That's very much a wining and dining type of approach. But if they have that much value to the success of your market, it might be worth looking at that. Now, I know that we are just out of time here. We're right at the end of it. So I really appreciate those of you who are still bringing the questions in, but in the efforts of time, I know that you all took an hour to be here with me today. Thank you so much for that. And I am going to send you a recording after this so that you can watch it all back. And I'll also take a look for some of those questions that you asked to see which ones I might be able to address after the fact. So thank you all again for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of this. I look forward to hearing from you on what you thought of this material. And I hope that you have an excellent day and a really great season for your market, or if it's a daily market, I hope it's great all the time. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll send you an email with the recap and the replay.